Good morning. Today we're going to cover chapter 10. So we'll give everyone just a minute to get in the meeting. Still have a couple of minutes. How's everybody doing? Everybody doing good? Okay, so remember, guys, that tomorrow your Unit 3 assignments are due. So that's going to be chapter workups 13 through 15, discussions 5 and 6, and the Unit 3 test, which covers chapters 13 through 15. Hey, Tessa. Yes, I'm doing great. Now, the one thing that I did want to say about tomorrow, with all of your assignments being due, at midnight tomorrow night, I will be going to a softball tournament. I think I told you guys this weekend. So after about noon tomorrow, I will be more than likely be unavailable to like log into Canvas and reset things and things of that nature. So I would highly suggest that you go ahead and you know, take your exam maybe tonight if you get the opportunity to do so, or in the morning, because once I'm leaving to take my daughter to Brownwood for a softball tournament. I can still answer my emails, but it's logging into Canvas is somewhat difficult on my phone. So I will do my very best to keep up with you guys over the weekend, but softball, we will be at the softball tournament. So let's get started on chapter 10. This is an interesting chapter. It covers human sexuality. So we're going to talk about various aspects of sexuality when we look at chapter 10 today. So the first thing that we talk about are the physical aspects of sexuality. So let's first talk about the primary sex characteristics. What is important to know about the primary sex characteristics is that they are directly involved in reproduction and they are present at birth. So in the womb, as you are being created, as you're cooking in the womb, you are developing your primary sex characteristics. So for a female, the primary sex characteristics are going to include the vagina, the uterus, and the ovaries. For a male, the primary sex characteristics include the penis, testes, scrotum, and prostate gland. So remember, they are directly involved in reproduction and they are present at birth. Secondary sex characteristics will develop at adolescence or at puberty. These include various other situations and physical characteristics that happen, such as the growth spurt, menarche, which is the first menstrual cycle that a female experiences, the breast development in women. Also for females, the widening of the hips, pubic hair, fat deposits. Can anyone, if you want to talk or type in the chat, can anyone tell me why fat deposits are important for females during puberty? Why do females need fat deposits? These fat deposits help to store energy in order for the female to support pregnancy whenever the female is pregnant with a child. Those fat deposits are important. So also for female secondary sex characteristics, we are seeing further growth and development of the uterus, vagina, and ovaries. For males, we are seeing the enlarged larynx, which is the Adam's apple, which is going to result in the deepening of the voice. We also see facial and chest hair, as well as pubic hair, a coarser skin texture, and a large increase in height. So what is interesting about puberty as far as physical growth, which we learn in the lifespan class, is just before puberty, just before a child hits puberty, you will see the child developing a more heavy weight, or they tend to get, they get bigger, but they don't get taller. But once they hit puberty and they start to increase in height, that their weight is going to be more evenly distributed. So that is not something to be overly concerned about, boys and girls, but most especially in girls just before puberty. So like I said, the primary sex characteristics are going to develop as the embryo develops. The gonads will be developing at 5 weeks old, but we still have the embryo having potential to become either a male or female. So remember, the 23rd pair of chromosomes will determine the sex of the child. If an X is present, if an X is given by the father, then we have a girl. If a Y is present, then we have a boy. So when we look at the sex hormones, we are going to refer to them as gonadotropins. So female sex hormones are the estrogens, and male sex hormones are the androgens. And androgens, the main one that we think about often is testosterone. So these hormones actually, as we look further into sexuality and gender, are going to have a big influence on all sorts of other characteristics, including the psychosocial implications for males and females. For instance, more testosterone, boys and girls both have all of these hormones. Boys and girls do have estrogens and androgens. However, for females, there are more estrogens and more concentrated amounts of estrogens, and for males, there is more testosterone. However, like I said, both males and females have all of these hormones. We do see psychosocially that more testosterone leads to more aggressive behavior. So you can think about the implications on that. And especially when we look at the lifespan class, we talk about aggressiveness in more detail and all of the various aspects of aggressiveness. The physical aspects of aggressiveness do include the androgens or testosterone being present, but we also have psychosocial implications. For instance, males, socialization, which we're going to look at in just a second, and how males and females are masculine or feminine. But we know that as a male develops, we often, if a male aggressiveness is more common and it's more encouraged than female aggressiveness. So we can also look at aggressiveness being part of socialization as well. So let's talk about the various aspects of gender. Gender are the psychological aspects of being male or female. For instance, we have gender roles, which are our cultural expectations for masculine and feminine behavior. So these can include attitude, actions, personality traits. We even go so far as looking at gender roles. Okay, I was just talking about this with my daughter yesterday. We were talking about gender. and she said, well, you know, used to, it's more like, I was trying to tell her about feminism. Okay, so I don't want anyone to get angry with me for saying this, but I am not a feminist person, you know. But I say that, but when I turn the tables, on the other hand, I am also a female who, um, throughout my marriage, I was the head of the household. I also had, you know, I've been in the workforce from day one. I take care of myself and my daughter financially and things of that nature. So I speak on two different sides of this. So I'm not an advocate for feminism, but I also think that females should be able to go out and take care of themselves without expecting a male to take care of them. So I was talking to my daughter about this. This all stemmed from the election and everything going on with that. So I was trying to talk to her about some things going on in the world. And she said, Mom, it seems like used to, it was more of the woman's job to do the cooking and the cleaning and taking care of the kids in the house. And I said, yes, ma'am. That's exactly right. So what she was demonstrating was her knowledge of a gender role. So even when we think of various jobs in our society, we often will attribute them to either male or female genders. It is true that males tend to have the more control or power jobs, and where female jobs tend to be the more like supporting jobs. So like usually a male will be an executive, a female would be a secretary. We can be thankful that those are becoming more equal, the gender roles in our society, but we also have to consider that in different cultures, the gender roles are opposite. So one of the things that we look at for in our culture, and this goes back to the socialization of cultural expectations. So if we look at it's more common to allow a male to be aggressive. And so we also think of females to be more emotional and verbal. So if we look at some other cultures, though, it is very common for males to be the emotional gender in certain cultures. So we have to consider the cultural expectations whenever we are looking at gender roles. Gender typing is the process of acquiring those gender role characteristics. So these can include two different things, okay? Socialization is huge. I'm going to skip down, okay, to this real fast. The social learning theory says that gender identity, becoming masculine or feminine, the sense of being masculine or feminine, is formed through reinforcement. So from day one, you know, at a baby shower or at all of these gender reveal parties. So if their blue pops out, we say it's going to be a baby boy. But if pink is, we see the color pink, we say it's going to be a girl. So from day one in our culture, we are assigning genders colors. So if you go to Walmart, you can often see, or Walmart or any other department store, you can often tell which aisles are for boys and which aisles are for girls based on the colors, blue and green. So social learning theory says that all of this gender identity or the sense of being male or female is formed from a very early age. When we tell, you know, little boys, big boys don't cry, you know, it's not okay for boys to cry or be a sissy in our culture. So they're formed from very early on. The gender schema theory, this is based off of Jean Piaget's theory that we've talked about before, says that a child will develop that pattern or that schema of being male or female very early on from observing their, their parents and other people in society, just as if they will develop a schema for a dog is a dog or a cat is a cat, they will also develop that schema for male and female. Now, with all of this talk about masculinity and femininity, you know that we see stereotyping happening in our society. So a gender stereotype is whenever we see a person or a group of people and we stereotype them based on male or female. So some of the common stereotypes in our society are that women aren't strong or men aren't emotional. So we often, these are created out of our gender schemas that we learn from a very early age. If these go too far, our gender stereotypes can lead to sexism. Sexism is prejudice against, or prejudice, remember, is an attitude. So prejudice is against males or females, usually females, which leads to unequal treatment. But when we're looking at gender, we can also, and we're going to talk about sexual orientation in just a minute, but we can also look at sexism as being, as if we have stereotypes about homosexuality and things of that nature. Benevolent sexism is the acceptance of positive stereotypes of males and females that leads to unequal treatment. So in our society, we do see this often because we accept, and I am guilty of this, I accept that it's the woman's place to take care of the children and to do the housework and things of that nature. I was very, very fortunate in my marriage that my husband, we shared the roles in our marriage and in taking care of our kiddos. We still do, or our one kid, but we did kind of raise other kids throughout our marriage. But we still do, even though my husband and my ex-husband are divorced, we still share roles and responsibilities in taking care of our daughter. So it's, it's not uncommon. I was gone for the weekend, and whenever I got back from my trip, my ex-husband had fixed my back door. So I could have gotten I could have gotten angry with him and said, what, you don't think that I can take care of myself and I can fix my own things? But which, kind of, I could have said that that was sexist of him to think of it that way, but he was actually just doing something for me that needed to be done that I just haven't had time to do. So, but in our marriage, like I said, he did a lot of the cooking and helped with the laundry, and I would mow the grass. So, we were very fortunate to have that type of relationship. Some people aren't, though. I've seen some marriages where the husband expects the wife to have his plate ready, or bring him a glass of tea, or like to be a servant. And I can't judge another person for the things that they encounter, or their beliefs or their values, but I am super thankful that I was not ever put into that position. Androgyny, sorry, is a situation where an individual will possess positive aspects of masculinity and femininity. So you might think of some androgynous folks that you have encountered in your lifetime. Maybe your grandmother, was very, maybe she was good at taking on the traditional female roles of the household, but she also wasn't scared to go out and, hunt or whatever, or to get a job or to work. So people that do display androgynous characteristics do tend to be less depressed and more happy and more capable than folks that just slip right into the traditional masculine or feminine roles in a culture. So let's look at the differences between males and females. First of all, we know that there are biological differences. There are physical aspects of males and females, if we looked at the primary and secondary sex characteristics that are different. There is a difference in males and females when it comes to hormones. So there are physical differences that are very obvious, but some of the not so obvious differences are not physical. These include the cognitive differences. For instance, typically, and this could be a result of socialization, not necessarily any physiological activity going on inside of the person, but it could be socialization. Males tend to have an advantage in math, in the maths and sciences, where females are more superior in verbal skills. Of course, as we know, those differences are decreasing, and we're becoming more on an equal basis. You know, we can look at, I'm not sure, I'm not going to make a hardcore speculation about the presidential election, but if, you know, if Biden is elected, then we have a female vice president, which has never happened. So we can see how these differences are shrinking. As far as emotions go, we do know that big boys don't cry. Men tend to be more aggressive. Women and men also tend to talk in a report style, talk about sports, what's happening in this world, where females tend to talk to each other in a more relational style. They talk about their emotions more. Okay, so now let's switch gears. We're going to go to the actual act of sexual intercourse. So let's talk about the stages of a sexual response. Masters and Johnson actually came up with these stages of a sexual response by studying folks. Okay, so let me tell you what they did. They would hire people, a lot of them were prostitutes, to come in and engage in sexual intercourse while being studied. So they looked at the various physical changes, physiological changes that were going on in the body while they were engaged in sexual intercourse. And they came up with these 4 stages. The first stage is excitement. This is the beginning of arousal. Also, we could include foreplay in this specific stage. The stage of plateau. This is where the physical changes beginning in the first stage will continue the actual act of sexual intercourse, which will eventually lead to orgasm for the male and female. During orgasm, of course, for males, semen is released from the penis. For the female, we have the vaginal wall muscles contracting. Typically, a female orgasm lasts longer than a male orgasm. And then the final stage of a sexual response is resolution. This is where the body, because of homeostasis, returns back to normal. For males, we are seeing a refractory period here. This is a time period just after orgasm that a male cannot become aroused or achieve erection. We also know that as far as these stages are concerned, that a female may experience more orgasms than a male during a sexual response. So something else that's interesting in looking at sexual activity are the Kinsey studies, and the Kinsey study and the Janus studies. So the Kinsey studies were surveys taken in the late 40s and early 50s. So what they found in these Kinsey studies, remember, we are just, during the late 1800s, we had the Victorian era, where sexual, any thoughts or of sex, sexual activity, all of those were repressed. Like, we're not going to talk about it. We're not going to, you know, we're just going to think that sexual intercourse is simply used for procreation. So the studies actually revealed some very highly controversial findings about sexual behavior, including sexual orientation, that homosexuality was present, including the fact that a lot of people do have premarital sex or extramarital sex, that sex was not just missionary style for procreation. So that's what the Kinsey studies did reveal. The Janus report was a very similar study done in the 1990s. They did not differ widely from the Kinsey studies. They actually just looked at further sexual deviance. Sexual deviance is typically seems to be behavior that is unacceptable according to societal norms and expectations. However, from the Janus report, we were seeing that the majority of people were actually experiencing or participating in sexually deviant behavior. Now, this can go to an extreme, which we're going to talk about in just a second. But first, let's talk about sexual orientation. So sexual orientation is, whom you are attracted to. So a heterosexual would be attracted to the opposite sex. Homosexual would be attracted to the same sex. And a bisexual person would be attracted to both sexes. Now, you cannot say that a person is necessarily strictly homosexual or strictly heterosexual or purely bisexual. So this is on a continuum. In other words, you may have a heterosexual individual who has dabbled a bit in homosexuality, and you may have a homosexual individual who has dabbled a bit in heterosexuality, or you could have people who are purely heterosexual or purely homosexual. So just remember that sexual orientation falls on a continuum. So let's talk about the development of this sexual orientation. So we can look at many different influences on sexual orientation. Of course, this can be a very controversial topic. When it comes to sexual orientation, studies have found that there actually are some biological differences in heterosexual versus homosexual individuals. So we do know that, let's see if I have it on here. Neuroimaging studies, for instance, have showed that heterosexual men and homosexual women are very neurologically similar, and homosexual men and heterosexual women are also very neurologically similar. Studies do indicate that there are some genetic influences on sexual orientation. We do see homosexuals, whether male or female, do tend to be more feminine as children, but we know that there are also other influences on sexual orientation, such as people even say birth order can have an influence on sexual orientation. And upbringing and environmental experiences, religion, all can have an influence on sexual orientation. So it's important whenever you're posting your discussion postings over the sexual orientation to be respectful to each other, and do not also, I would ask that you do not post anything if you can't back it up with studies or research whenever doing that. Now, I talked just a little bit ago about sexual deviance. So what I want to talk about really quickly before we look at sexual problems are, I don't have actually a slide for it, but I do want to talk about some sexual deviance has gradually become more normal, that we can look at some sexual deviance that I would venture to say our society still does not consider normal, like pedophilia. Even though some people are advocating for pedophilia to be a sexual orientation, I will be very blunt with that and say I do not agree with that at all. We look at things like necrophilia. These are individuals that are aroused by having sex with dead people. Y'all know I watch the ID channel a lot, and I see a lot of this, and it kind of freaks me out a little bit. Any type of sexual philia we can see as things that odd, or what we might consider odd, a deviant object or thing that turns people on. So, or arouses people. So in other words, you know, some people might have a fetish over shoes or feet or something of that nature. So those are all considered different types of deviant behavior. But we can also see that some of these terms are listed in the DSM as definitely psychological disorders, such as like necrophilia. Definitely not something that is so common, can lead to, you know, a very dysfunctional lifestyle. So now let's talk about different sexual dysfunctions. A sexual dysfunction is a problem with sexual functioning. This could be due to something physical. So we can look at different things like a medication can lead to a sexual dysfunction, like an arousal disorder. So some medications or other problems, it can be physical or psychological, can lead to the individual not being able to become sexually aroused. So this would be like an erectile disorder, like a male cannot get an erection. Like I said, these can be physical due to medication or some other type of physiological problem. It also can be due to emotional issues or psychological issues. For instance, if you're in a relationship that is not, you know, where there abuse is involved, it may be difficult for you to become aroused whenever you are with that individual. But we also look at things like female orgasmic disorder, where a female cannot, or this can happen in males too, cannot reach orgasm for one reason or another. So like I said, many different causes to these. There are different, there are many of these that are also coded in the DSM as well. Sexual desire or arousal disorders, disorders related to the physical act of intercourse, disorders related to the timing or inability to reach orgasm. We also look at things like pain during sexual intercourse, things like that. Okay, so let's quickly discuss sexually transmitted infections, STIs. You might have heard of these also as STDs. So there are many different types of STDs or STIs. Let's look at this chart. They can be bacterial or viral. Bacterial STIs, of course, can be treated with antibiotics. Viral STIs cannot be cured. So different types of STIs include chlamydia, syphilis, gonorrhea, herpes, genital warts, and then also AIDS is a sexually transmitted infection. So I think that the best thing to do as far as areas that are directly affecting the sex characteristics, if there's any type of burning or pain or odd odor coming from the area, it's best to probably get that checked out. So, but we also do see things like AIDS being sexually transmitted diseases. Now, one thing that I have always wondered when it, you know, as I've grown up and wondered about AIDS is, when does the virus move from the HVP, HIV to AIDS. And that is when the T cell count drops below a certain level. So just a little bit of information there. Okay, so how do you stop the spread of STIs? Well, the main thing is abstinence. You know, do not engage in sexual activity unless you are in a, you know, maybe a marital relationship or a relationship that is a long-term relationship. Always use condoms. Of course, we know that some of these infections can also be spread through IV drug use. Always don't just trust that what your partner says about the people that he or she has been with, but make sure that you abstain from sexual activity until you're sure. It really is important, not only physically, but it's also important psychologically and emotionally, that we take care of our sexuality. So, does anybody have any questions or comments about chapter 10? Okay, so remember, like I said, that all of your Unit 3, which is chapters 13 through 15, assignments are due tomorrow by midnight. It is a high possibility that I will be unavailable after noon tomorrow through Monday. So make sure that you get those submitted early in case you have any problems. Next week, we will cover chapter 11 on Tuesday and chapter 12 on Thursday. And then we'll be finished with the material, and we'll just be right on track to wrap up the semester. So if you have any questions or concerns, don't hesitate to email me. And I hope that you all have a great weekend. See you next week.